Okay, so you may be wondering why I even got this engine since I have a lot of other projects. Well, this was kind of, lucky because I was going to give away some scrap metals to a guy that collects scrap metal, and he happened to have that engine. So he asked me if I wanted to trade the metal scraps to this engine, or for this engine, because that engine has been pulled out of another Toyota Carina and had some kind of failure, he said, but I turned it over and it sounded okay, had compression, so I said yeah, sure, why not, because the 4A-FE block is actually the same as the 4A-GE, just with some minor modifications. So if the engine was toast, I could probably use the block anyway, and especially the oil sump, because that already has an oil drain built in, so I wouldn't need to fabricate one for the turbo build.
Please God, can you give me some relief? I've been out here hiding like a thief. I'll pull the windows down when I feel low. Keep my demons close so nobody knows the side that lives inside of me. Oh my God, I can't breathe, and they don't know why. Angels come and they leave into the midnight sky. You only know how much you meant. You only know the time we spent. Take the pain from my heart and make it whole again.
So, okay, before I'm going to start telling you what I'm going to do with this engine, I want to show you the actual problems we have, or rather how the engine looks from the inside. First of all, we have the rods and pistons up here, and actually they don't look too terrible. They have some wear on the piston skirts, so like here. On most of them it's not really noticeable, but on this one, for example, we have some quite deep grooves, and this is also something why I'm going to use new pistons and overbore the cylinders. Although the cylinders, you will see soon, still look pretty good, the pistons, yeah, they have some wear, and one of them is quite badly worn and has some relatively deep grooves in it. And a new set of pistons is like $100, so that's not really that bad. Seeing the bearing wear we have here leads me to believe that this engine is relatively high mileage. I would guess at least 300,000 kilometers, maybe more, because all of the bearings are worn quite evenly, so nothing really that got into there, or nothing that had any signs of a lot of heat or something, nothing melted, and it's, I think, just normal wear, and the engine was just quite high mileage, which also the crank shows me when we get to that. Speaking of the crank, you would see from your position that it looks like there are pretty heavy grooves in here, although it isn't really that bad. You can feel some of them with your finger, although it's not like there are grooves in there. It's just somewhat uneven, and I think it is not that terrible, and it can be polished out. As you can see on this journal, I have tried and polished this up a bit, and it came out pretty good. So I would guess if this crank is still within spec, which I'm going to try with some new bearings, that I'm gonna reuse this and I can still continue this, because if this crankshaft was bad, I would not reassemble this engine. Yeah, just so that's clear. So we'll get some new bearings first and check the bearing clearances. And if they are still good, then this engine is going back together with oversized pistons and everything else that needs to be reconditioned. Looking at the block, you can't really see much. That's why I'm going to show you with a flashlight. There is some residual rust in there because I think this engine had a head gasket failure and was pulled because of that. And therefore some water stood in the cylinders, but it did not remove any material out of the cylinders or did not create any grooves, although I'm going to still overbore it if I'm going to use it, because first of all, well, the pistons are kind of meh, and also if I measure the bore, yeah, and we have that cylinder, this one is the worst. It is 400ths or so, 0.04 millimeters out of round, I think. Yeah, 0.04 millimeters out of round, and that is too much because on a stock piston you are going to want to run about a 0.04 to 0.07 millimeters piston to wall clearance, and so 0.04 already. If the piston is the bore is out of round, then that's already like at least half of the piston to wall clearance. So they need to be rebored precisely, and the correct piston size needs to be put in. And also the pistons might have some differentiating numbers, so I'm just gonna be safe and bore the block over 0.5 millimeters and use some oversized pistons. I did also measure it with the head installed and torqued down, because that can alter the measurements, but that was almost the same. So the bores are pretty much out of round, and I do need to do what I just said. As for the oil pump, some of you may know that there are different revisions of the oil pumps for the 4A engines, and I have the revision that is probably the best for oil pressure and oil flow, and that has the biggest gears inside, although I need to replace this pump anyway, because those are the gears. They are 9.5 as compared to 7.5 or 7.4 I think in the smaller version, but I need to replace it anyway because there is some score and some scoring marks and some wear on the backing plate, and this needs to be perfectly straight or perfectly smooth, because if this has scoring or wear in it, the gears inside the oil pump will not be able to produce the correct amount of oil pressure. And there's also some scoring here, so this is the other end, and this is why maybe the oil pump wasn't flowing as much oil as it was when it was new, and that could also be a sign why the wear on the bearings, for example, was pretty advanced. And yeah, that could be the case, but doesn't have to be. A new pump is about 30 to 40 bucks, so it's not that big of a deal. And yeah, I just disassembled it so I could see if that was actually the problem, but it didn't really seem to be that huge of a problem, but it was definitely worn out. As for the head, this is where it also gets interesting, because repairing the head, depending on how bad the damage is, can also be expensive. And I already cleaned this up quite a bit, because at the beginning this was quite filthy, and I need to repair at least 8 valve guides or valves, depending on how the valves look. I've already marked them, so these are these two, and this one, as well as this one. I have some issues with most of the valve guides being worn, or 8 of the valve guides being worn. So the valves have excessive play. I don't know if you can notice it in the camera, but this, for example, has excessive play, or for example, this one does not. This is much better. So is this one, for example. It's not perfect, it's not zero play, but it's better than the first one, for example, is. And the issue is some valves seem to stick, which is quite weird. So I may have to redo some more valve guides, because see that rust on the valves, that might be also an issue when it comes to reassembly, but or rather the valves in general. I will clean it up before I send it to the machine shop and let me tell what they say, but at least those two intake valves need to be, or those 4 intake valves and these exhaust valves need to be redone. All of the valves have some carbon buildup. I will remove that obviously, and I will reshape the channels, or rather the runners somewhat, or port them before I put this engine back together. But I just first want to make sure that I get the head working again and in a better state than it is now. And this valve, for example, doesn't even open further than this, so I can push it, it doesn't go further than this, or maybe now it does. Yeah, see, that valve guide was quite rusted. Where on the camshafts it is the same probably as it is on the crankshaft, but the weird thing is that they appear to have some oil residue here. So either the camshafts are pretty old, or the head was redone at some point, or at least washed and reconditioned in some way. So I'm not really sure about that, because the head looks very clean on the top side. There you can see that the head looks indeed very clean for a engine with high mileage. So that might have been redone at some point. So what's going to happen with this engine? Well, I want to rebuild this engine, so use again oversized pistons, but stock pistons, and then just use it in my carina, because the engine that's in there, the 4AG20 valve, is pretty tired, and I want to rebuild that as well. And because I can put that in and drive the car, then while I can drive it, I can rebuild the 4AG with forged internals without needing to hurry. Then that is the much better option. And I can also try turbocharging that until, well, I don't know, until like 400 horsepower or something. Because the rods look actually pretty strong. For example, this is a Miata rod, and they are at the neck even a bit stronger than a Miata rod. So they may be able to hold about 350, 400 horsepower. Especially with a bit bigger turbo. So that might be an option. Or just, if the 4AG is finished, pull this out and put the 4AG back in, and then it's just so that I have a running engine and I can drive the car. And also it's going to be kind of an experiment of how much you actually need if you do most of the work yourself, on as far as budget goes, and yeah, if you can recondition an engine for a comparatively small price. So obviously this isn't going to break any records or whatever, but not many people have done anything about the 4A-FE engine, so it might be pretty interesting to some, because that engine is pretty, well, it is in a lot of cars out there. So for example, Corollas, Carinas, I think even some Celicas, if I'm not mistaken. So this, I think, might be kind of interesting. Let me know in the comments what you think about this, and yeah, otherwise have a nice day. Bye!